She was a rising star, lighting up the Johnny Carson show like no other. But one moment changed everything. What happened that got her banned from the legendary stage forever? The story behind the curtain will shock you. She was once Johnny Carson's golden girl, the star everyone wanted on The Tonight Show. Then, just like that, she vanished. No farewell, no cameo, no tribute. When the ratings slipped and the applause quieted, she was erased. Invisible. Exile. No explanation, no warning. Only the cold silence of a door slammed shut. And she wasn't alone. A select few found themselves on the unforgiving wrong side of Johnny Carson's smile. Hollywood, ever eager to please the king, turned its back the moment Johnny's warmth turned to ice. What kind of late-night monarch builds a kingdom on charm and fear? That's the question we're about to explore. Once upon a time, one show held the keys to fame, fortune, and survival in Hollywood. The Tonight Show wasn't just a program. It was the proving ground. Landing a 5-minute spot meant your entire life could flip overnight. You wanted to be taken seriously? That stage was your golden ticket. But every ticket came with fine print. There were unspoken rules, whispered behind closed doors, understood by everyone but never voiced aloud. Cross the wrong line, challenge the king's authority, or disrespect the delicate balance, and you were out. Not because of talent or audience appeal, but because Johnny Carson simply decided you didn't belong. Once Johnny turned his back, the rest of Hollywood followed suit, like a shadowy chain reaction. From the outside, viewers saw laughter and applause, witty banter, and smooth punchline. But behind that bright curtain, tension simmered. One misstep, a joke too sharp, a moment when a guest didn't let Johnny have the last word, and the damage was done. Sometimes it was simple, a joke misfired, a timing error. Other times, the rift ran deeper, tangled in loyalty disputes, or behind-the-scenes business decisions that felt like betrayal. And the most painful were the silent feuds born in private, ending careers without a public fight. No headlines, no dramatic confrontations, just sudden, unexplained absence. Guests stopped coming. Chairs sat empty. When asked, the response was a casual shrug, a knowing look. You know how it is. But for those on the other side, the silence was deafening. A lifetime of work could vanish with one missed invite. Being banned from Carson wasn't just a blow to the ego. It could be a career death sentence. To grasp the real power of The Tonight Show during Carson's reign, you have to remember what television was before the internet age. This wasn't just any late-night talk show. This was the place to be, whether you were a rising comedian, a nervous first-timer, or a Hollywood heavyweight promoting a blockbuster. If you made it to Johnny's stage, you were made. Carson's effortless charm was legendary. His sly grin, the perfect pause before the punchline landed. And who could forget Karnak the Magnificent, decked out like a bargain bin psychic, cracking jokes so absurd they became iconic. That goofy sketch was pure magic. But the true power lay in the wave, a simple gesture inviting a guest from the spotlight to the interview chair. That wave was a career-defining moment. David Letterman and Jerry Seinfeld often said it changed everything. Millions tuned in nightly, glued to their screens because missing Johnny was unthinkable. There was no streaming, no on-demand clips. You watched The Tonight Show live, or you missed out. Johnny didn't just host a show. He invented the blueprint for late-night television. Monologues, sketches, musical guests, everything that modern hosts like Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, and Stephen Colbert still borrow today began with Carson. For 3 decades, Johnny ran an empire untouched, his reign unquestioned. But the man behind the curtain was far more complex. When the cameras stopped rolling, the charm faded. Behind the jokes was a man who could be ruthless. If you crossed him, consequences were brutal. Being cut from The Tonight Show meant more than a missed TV spot. It was a professional erasure. Bookers stopped calling. Studios grew wary. Other shows kept their distance. All because Johnny's silence spoke volume. He never needed to say a word publicly. His quiet exile was punishment enough. In Hollywood, everyone knew one truth. If Johnny Carson was done with you, you were done. It was a brutal power, one that Johnny Carson never had to announce or justify. He didn't need to publicly blacklist anyone. All he had to do was casually mention something during an interview or simply talk about his day. And suddenly, the person on the other side of his microphone would vanish from booking. In Hollywood, this kind of quiet exile never went unnoticed. The industry understood. Fall out of favor with Johnny, and your career could collapse overnight. Some comedians tried to laugh it off, pretending it wasn't a big deal. Others learned the hard way. Take Rich Little, for example, a legendary impressionist famed for his uncanny celebrity voices. He poked fun at Johnny a little too often, and the result was swift and merciless exile. Officially, they said his act had grown stale. Unofficially, he'd crossed an invisible, deadly line. Dana Carvey faced a similar fate. Known for his razor-sharp impressions, Carvey performed a spot-on impersonation of Carson himself while promoting Wayne's World. Johnny didn't laugh. He said nothing. No public rebuke, no confrontation, but the silence was deafening. Carvey was banned just like that. And the scariest part? No one ever knew where the line was drawn until you stepped over and fell off. So, who dared to challenge Johnny, and who paid the steepest price? The most infamous fallout was with Joan Rivers, a woman Johnny once called his protege. Back in the 1960s, Rivers was a scrappy, sharp-tongued comedian who stood out in a male-dominated world. Johnny took her under his wing, inviting her onto The Tonight Show when female comedians were still a rarity. He made her a regular, gave her a shot at national stardom when others dismissed her as washed up at just 31. When Joan crushed her first set on his show, Johnny turned to the camera with a grin and said, "You're gonna be hearing a lot about this girl." That one moment changed everything. Overnight, Rivers went from struggling club comic to writer and permanent guest host for Carson himself. From the outside, it looked like a dream partnership, the king of late night and his rising queen. But behind the laughs, a storm was brewing. In 1986, Joan accepted an offer from Fox to host her own late-night show, a groundbreaking opportunity on a fledgling network. She was terrified, but saw no future hosting The Tonight Show once Johnny retired. Worse still, NBC executives had quietly told her she wasn't in the running. But the biggest mistake? She didn't tell Johnny first. He found out through the gossip grapevine. Furious, Carson didn't scream or rant. He went silent, cold fury that cut deeper than any public feud. He hung up when Joan called, refused to return her letters, and never spoke to her again. That silence was her exile. Joan was not just off The Tonight Show, she was blacklisted. Anyone who appeared on her Fox show was barred from Johnny's couch. Insiders said Carson felt betrayed, not by her leaving, but by her going behind his back. To Johnny, loyalty was everything, and breaking that trust was unforgivable. Joan was like family to him. Once that bond was broken, she was done. Years later, Joan Rivers still spoke of Johnny with heartbreak. She called him the most important figure in her career, the first man to truly believe in her. She said she wrote him a letter every year, hoping for a response, any sign of reconciliation, but nothing ever came. Carson erased her from the show's history. For decades, clips of Joan's appearances were buried, her name unspoken. She became the invisible woman of The Tonight Show. Joan later reflected on why she thought Johnny was so angry. "I think he really felt because I was a woman that I was his, that I wouldn't leave him. I know it sounds warped, but I don't understand it any other way." When Carson died in 2005, Joan admitted she cried, not just for the loss of a legendary icon, but because she had lost her mentor. She said, "I would have done anything to make it right. I just wanted to talk. He wouldn't even look at me." Joan Rivers was far from the only one to feel Johnny's wrath, sometimes on live television. Not everyone got banned for rudeness or disrespect. Some just didn't know when to stop pushing. Take Bobcat Goldthwait, a wild, loud, unpredictable comedian whose energy could make you laugh or leave you uneasy. One night, during a guest spot, Bobcat lit the chair on fire. Yes, literally, right on live TV. What he thought was a hilarious stunt turned into a disaster. The network was furious. Even though Jay Leno was hosting at the time, many believed Carson would never have approved. Bobcat was arrested, convicted of arson, fined $2,700 plus the cost of the chair, and sentenced to do public service announcements on fire safety. And just like that, his late-night career was over. He never set foot on that stage again. Then there's Kathy Griffin, whose brand is bold, loud, and unapologetically edgy. She tackles taboo topics and doesn't care who gets offended. That attitude rubbed late-night hosts the wrong way, especially Jay Leno, Carson's successor. Kathy's edgy humor crossed lines repeatedly, leading to bans from multiple shows, including The Tonight Show. While Carson never banned her personally, she fit perfectly into the mold of a comedian who wouldn't have survived his reign. One too many off-color jokes, and the doors quietly closed. Contrast that with Melanie Chartoff, a comedian who never lit chairs on fire or insulted anyone on air. Her jokes were harmless, often just making the crew laugh. She was one of the few who genuinely got along with Carson, even appearing on his show multiple times, including a memorable 1982 episode alongside legends George Burns and Richard Dawson. That's the paradox of Johnny Carson. He could make or break careers with a wave or a smile. But be careful, he could also slay a career with a single cold glance or the weight of his silence. On The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, getting banned didn't always take an act of rebellion. Sometimes, all it took was a misstep, a misunderstood joke, an unscripted moment, or a truth spoken too soon. If Johnny Carson didn't like it, or you were gone. No explanation. No drama, just silence. Howie Mandel learned that the hard way. Back when Johnny was still sharpening his on-screen persona, Howie brought a giant stuffed tiger on stage, an unscheduled prop meant to lighten the mood. It was goofy, harmless, meant to get a laugh, but Johnny hated surprises, especially ones that disrupted his meticulous rhythm. That night, it was Howie's laugh. No formal ban, no confrontation, just cold, brutal silence. He was never invited back. Then there was Lola Falana. She was magnetic, graceful, bold, a star who lit up every room she entered. But during one appearance, she spoke openly about the racism she faced as a black woman in showbiz. It wasn't angry, it was honest, it was real. But Johnny wasn't ready for that kind of conversation, not on his stage. And just like that, Lola was gone. No encore, no second chance. America still wasn't ready to hear those truths on late-night TV, and Carson wasn't willing to be the one to force that reckoning. Artie Lange's ban came later, and from someone else. Years after Carson, Artie was pulled from late night with Conan O'Brien. It wasn't personal, it was about survival. Artie was deep in the throes of addiction, unpredictable and spiraling. Conan's team made the call, no more booking. At the time, Artie was crushed, but years later, in recovery, he admitted it may have saved his life. That ban was his wake-up call, a line in the sand that forced him to stop, breathe, and eventually rebuild. Not every ban ended a career. Some were the first steps toward redemption. But not all showbiz fallouts were quiet. One of Johnny Carson's most infamous feuds played out in full public view, masked as comedy, soaked in tension. Wayne Newton and Johnny Carson started as friends, but when Newton outbid Carson for a stake in a Vegas hotel, Johnny took it personally and made Newton the punchline of his jokes. Night after night, the barbs got meaner. Newton finally stormed into NBC and confronted him. After that, Carson never joked about him again. He also never spoke to him again. When Johnny cut you off, it was permanent. That's the power Carson held. Before The Tonight Show, he was just a quiet kid from Nebraska doing magic tricks. But once he took the desk in 1962, he ruled late-night TV for 30 years. Calm, sharp, untouchable. Off stage, though, he was guarded. He didn't like being upstaged, didn't let people in, and kept tight control over his world, including his 4 rocky marriages. His charm on camera masked a deep loneliness off. By the time he married Alexis Maas, he'd grown more private. And that's how he ended things too. No farewell tour, no comeback, just silence. But not everything could be fixed. Johnny's relationship with his son Rick, one of 3 children from his first marriage, was strained. Rick battled addiction and legal trouble, and being Johnny Carson's son came with an unbearable weight. When Rick died in a car crash in 1991, Carson was shattered. He never spoke much about it, but those who knew him say it broke something in him that never fully healed. In the end, Johnny Carson was a man of contradiction, charming and guarded, hilarious and haunted, publicly adored and privately isolated. He shaped comedy, built careers, banned others, and always kept the spotlight exactly where he wanted, until the curtain fell for good. And that's the legacy of Johnny Carson. Not just the laugh, but the silence that followed. You could see it in his eyes the next time he appeared on television. The man who once made a nation laugh now seemed fragile, like the weight of the years had finally caught up with him. When Johnny Carson retired in 1992, he didn't do a farewell tour. He didn't jump into a new project or chase the spotlight like so many others. He simply vanished. He moved to Malibu, spent quiet days on his yacht, and turned down nearly every interview. There was no bitterness, just a desire to step away for good. But even as he shut the world out, the legend of Johnny Carson never dimmed. Johnny's legacy. Carson was a man of paradoxes. On stage, he was magnetic, effortless, master of timing with a wink that could bring down the house. Off stage, he was guarded, withdrawn, and deeply private. You could work with him for years and still feel like you barely knew the man behind the curtain. By the time the public learned Johnny was seriously ill, it was already too late. Emphysema, brought on by a lifetime of smoking, had taken hold. And just like that, in January 2005, curtain fell one final time, quietly, without spectacle. Fitting, in a way. Johnny was never one for drawn-out goodbyes. But long before his final bow, Carson had already become a part of television history. In 1987, he was honored with a Peabody Award for 25 years of hosting The Tonight Show, a quarter-century of redefining late-night television, delivering cultural touchpoints, and mastering the art of conversation. By the mid-1970s, he wasn't just America's favorite TV host, he was the highest-paid personality on television, earning tens of millions annually. Yet even at the top, Johnny began pulling back. Maybe it was burnout, maybe he saw the future. He scaled down his schedule, handed over the reins to guest hosts, one of them being Joan Rivers, in a move that would later spark its own painful chapter. Still, no matter who sat at the desk, it was always Johnny's show. And even now, his shadow looms large over late-night television. You can see his DNA in Jimmy Fallon's playful charm, in Jimmy Kimmel's sharp wit, and in Stephen Colbert's crafted monologues. The opening jokes, the desk-side banter, the breezy conversations that feel like you're eavesdropping on old friends. That's all Carson's blueprint. Everyone since has just added a little seasoning. Sure, Johnny wasn't perfect. He could be icy. He could be demanding. Sometimes he let the power go to his head, but he was also a master of his craft, a cultural touchstone. A man who owned a room, even when that room was 30 million living rooms across America. He helped shape how a nation said goodnight, with a laugh, a story, and a little glimmer of glamour. And that's the strange magic of Johnny Carson. You didn't have to know him to feel like you did. He left behind no tell-all memoir, no deeply personal interviews, just the echo of laughter, still playing in reruns. A reminder that once upon a time, a quiet man from Nebraska ruled the night and made America feel like they were in on the joke. Have you ever watched a Johnny Carson show? What's your favorite Tonight Show moment or guest? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive. And click the next video on your screen to explore more untold stories from the golden age of television.